When I brought my husband, I had no idea that 20 years later he would come back with a request that would put me in a life and death choice. Life always knows when to strike. And it does it especially well when you're just starting to feel safe. Anna, thought that the past remained where it belonged, in a distant, dark corner of my memory. But fate had decided otherwise. It was an ordinary evening. Saturday. No plans, no guests, just me, a glass of wine, and a book I'd put aside months ago. The neighbors had already turned off the lights, the street was drowned in silence, and the only sound was the barely audible creak of the old couch beneath me. I relaxed, thinking this evening would be as boring as all the others lately. And then there was a knock. Muffled, insistent, annoying. At first I thought it was the wrong door. Neighbors often make their theatrical mixed-up visits. But a few seconds later, the knocking was repeated. Harder this time. I put down my glass and headed for the door, muttering irritably. Who's there on a night like this? When I opened the door, I froze. There he was. Victor. A man I hadn't seen in 20 years. He'd changed, but not so much that I didn't recognize him. Deep wrinkles, gray in his hair, the look of a tired but still proud man. He kept his hands in his pockets and looked like he was struggling with himself, trying to find the words. Anna, can I come in? Just like that. Calmly, as if we had parted not after a terrible scandal, but yesterday on a good note. My brain was screaming, close the door. Close it and forget what you saw. But the heart. My heart gave a silly twitch. And I hated myself for it. What are you doing here? I breathed out, trying not to show how much my hands were shaking. Victor looked into my eyes, and there was something in his gaze that I hadn't seen before. Fatigue? Fear? Insecurity? Anna, I'm here for a reason. It's important. It's, a matter of life and death. That's a phrase I certainly didn't expect to hear. A matter of life and death? Victor, who'd always thought only of himself, suddenly declaring something so serious? You have 2 minutes, I said coldly, not moving from my seat. Believe me, I wouldn't have come if it could have been handled differently. I know you hate me, and you probably have every reason to. But, Anna, I need to talk. I'm asking you to. I stopped talking. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest, and my mind was racing with dozens of thoughts, from, what does he want, to, what if he's telling the truth? Okay, come on in. Just remember, one lie and I'll kick you out the door, okay? He nodded, taking a step inside. And from that moment on, things didn't go as I'd planned. Victor sat down on the old couch, which creaked under his weight. He still had his hands in his pockets, as if he was afraid of being exposed if he made one false gesture. My gaze automatically noticed the small scratch on his fingers, stained with dried blood. The weariness in his eyes made me wonder what could have made this man show up 20 years later. Well, spill it. I sat down across from him, my arms crossed over my chest. My voice sounded confident, though I was trembling inside. He was silent. He seemed to be searching for words or trying to piece together his story. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. You came in with such a big life and death statement, I raised an eyebrow sarcastically. I hope this isn't another trick. His gaze met mine, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe? Maybe pain? I'll start by saying, Anna, I'm really sorry I hurt you so much back then. I chuckled. A confession after 2 decades, how timely. You're sorry? I asked, not hiding my sarcasm. Weren't you sorry then? He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Anna, you may not believe me, but I didn't come here to argue or make excuses. I know I deserve your scorn. But now is not the time for that. So just tell me what you want. 20 years ago, our lives looked very different. Victor was an ambitious man with a charm that could win over anyone. He could talk in such a way that people believed him. I was younger, more naive, and it seemed to me that I had found a man who would be everything to me. Our affair started out wildly. It was the kind of love that reminds you of a movie: crazy gestures, night walks, talking until morning. He knew how to convince me that everything would be fine, even if circumstances said otherwise. But in real life, beautiful promises don't always coincide with reality. Remember when you said we'd be happy no matter what? I squinted sarcastically, reminding him of his words. Victor nodded. I really did think that. And when you left for another business trip and came back 3 weeks later, what did you think then? He froze. Anna, it was a long time ago. A long time ago? For you it's a long time ago, but for me it was the point of no return. I stood up, feeling the anger rising in me in a wave. Victor had always been a man who liked to take risks. He would invest in questionable projects, make big announcements, and then disappear, leaving me to deal with the consequences. I remember the day it all fell apart. He needed another investment, this time in a business that was sure to take off. I sold everything I had, including some old jewelry left by my grandmother. And then it turned out the business was just a front. You don't even realize how much you ruined my life. I looked up at him, holding back tears. He lowered his gaze again. I do understand. No, Victor, you don't understand. You just want me to believe you again. But it won't work. I know you don't believe me, his voice trembled. And I'm not apologizing. I just want to. He stopped talking. You want what? I gave him an icy stare. Help. The word sounded like a thunderclap. I remembered how, months after we'd broken up, I'd tried to put my life back together. How I had to start all over again, renting an apartment, finding a new job, learning to trust people. Those 20 years taught me a lot: resilience, self-sufficiency, the ability not to look back. But now this man is here again, and with just one request, he made me remember everything I had buried so diligently. Help? Are you serious? I laughed, though it was more of a nervous laugh. You disappeared from my life, leaving me in ruins, and now you come back with a request? I realize that sounds selfish, he admitted. Selfish? That's an understatement, Victor. Anna, his voice grew quieter. This isn't just about me. The phrase made me freeze. What do you mean? He closed his eyes as if preparing for a hard confession. It's about our son. The words knocked the ground out from under me. I tried to control myself, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Son? I asked, feeling my insides clench. Victor, what are you talking about? He looked into my eyes, and there was something in his gaze that I feared more than anything. Anna, I know it's hard for you to believe me. But I didn't lie. We have a son. And he's in trouble. It all sounded so absurd that I thought for a moment, maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I just fell asleep on my couch with a glass of wine and now I'm dreaming about some ridiculous drama. Do we have a son? I repeated slowly, trying to make sure I understood his words correctly. Victor nodded. Are you serious? I raised my eyebrows, trying to keep my voice firm, but I was shaking inside. Victor, you were in my life 20 years ago. If we have a son, would you be so kind as to explain how that happened without me even knowing about it? It's a long story, he began. You have 2 minutes to explain. His gaze became heavy. It was like he was searching for words that wouldn't fuel the fire even more, but I was already seething with anger. When we broke up, I found out you were pregnant, he said, barely audible. The words hit me harder than anything he could have said. I stood up abruptly. Victor, are you, Are you kidding me? Did you know I was pregnant? And what? You just left? I thought that you'd make the choice yourself. He avoided my gaze. I felt a wave of anger and pain wash over me. A choice? My voice got louder. You didn't even give me a chance to talk about it. You just walked away, Victor. You walked away. I was scared then. He held up his hands as if defending himself. I didn't know what to do. I thought you'd make up your own mind. Decide? I lost the baby, Victor. I shouted, unable to contain my emotions. He froze, his face pale. What? You heard me. I lost the baby. After you left me, I got in trouble. I looked away, trying to deal with the memories that came flooding back. For 20 years, I tried not to think about that loss. I'd buried it all deep inside, convincing myself that life had moved on. After Victor left, I was faced with difficult circumstances. Nerves, stress, loneliness, it all took a toll on my health. The baby. My baby. That pain was like a scar that never fully heals. Anna, I didn't know. His voice shook. I thought that. You thought? I interrupted him, gritting my teeth. You never thought, Victor. All you did was run away as soon as it got hard. Victor sighed heavily and ran a hand over his face. He looked like he was about to fall. Listen, Anna. I didn't come here to open old wounds. I know I'm to blame. I know what I did back then was despicable. But this isn't about me now. Then who is it about? I folded my arms across my chest, unwilling to accept his excuses. Misha. Misha? I asked him again. About our son. Those words knocked the ground out from under me again. Are you kidding me? I froze, not knowing how to react. Victor, what kind of game is this? It's not a game, Anna. You lost one child, but we had another chance. He spoke quickly, like he was afraid I'd interrupt him. After you left, I found out we had a son. And where had he been all this time? I grinned sarcastically. At your place? Not exactly. I looked at him puzzled. I didn't know he existed until a few years ago. He was raised by another family. I laughed, but it was a bitter, sarcastic laugh. Victor, this is getting absurd. Are you trying to tell me that we have a son you didn't even know? Yes, he nodded gravely. And now, after 20 years, you come to me with this information? Why? He was silent, but his eyes spoke more than words. Because he needs help, Anna. He's sick. Those words silenced me. What? He has serious health problems. And I can't help him alone. I stared at his face, trying to figure out if he was lying or telling the truth. Victor could be anything, but right now his eyes were honest. What makes you think I'm going to help you? I asked quietly. Because you're his mother, he answered, and there was a sincere plea in his voice. That phrase shattered me again. Mother. Could I be a mother to a child I had never seen? Who I had never held in my arms? I didn't know what to say. Silence filled the room like a thick fog. I stared at Victor, not believing my ears. His words sounded both absurd and frightening. Mother? I asked him again, feeling something breaking inside me. Victor, do you realize how ridiculous this is? I'm the mother of a child I didn't even know I had. I realize how it sounds. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. But it's true. It's true. I laughed sarcastically, even though tears were coming to my eyes. After 20 years of silence, you suddenly come to me with this truth? What's next, Victor? Will you say that we also lost a gold bar somewhere? He didn't react to my sarcasm. Instead, his gaze remained calm but intense. Anna, I didn't come here to argue. I came here to ask for help. Help? I repeated, feeling the anger rising in my chest. You think I should help? After everything you've done? He nodded, like it was obvious. Because this isn't about me. It's about him. Explain. I sat back down on the couch, trying to keep my cool. I want to hear everything. From the beginning. Victor adjusted the collar of his worn jacket as if he were going to confession. When we broke up, I really didn't know anything. I left, trying to build a new life. But... He fell silent, searching for words. But what? I hurried him on. A few years later, I found out from a woman I was dating, that we might have had a child together. Could have? My voice trembled. She said she saw you at the hospital. His eyes searched mine, but I averted my gaze. She said she heard you were expecting a baby. Those words made me remember that time. How I went to that very hospital. How I sat in the long, cold hallway, contemplating my life after losing my baby. But I never told anyone about it. And what? I made an effort to keep from screaming. You just believed her? He nodded. Not at first, no. But after a few years, I found proof. What kind of proof? I asked, feeling anger mingle with curiosity. Medical records, he said quietly. Those words struck me like lightning. You were looking for medical records? Victor, have you lost your mind? I wanted to know, Anna. I wanted to know what happened. And what did you find out? I looked at him with contempt. That we had a son, he said, as if that explained everything. And that he'd been placed in foster care. I froze. What? You should have been told. The doctors or someone. But, I realized you didn't even know about it. My heart was pounding so hard that I couldn't sit any longer. I got up and started pacing around the room. Are you telling me that I had a baby and didn't even know it? I threw an incredulous look at him. He nodded. I know how it sounds, Anna. But I found him. Our son. Our son? I sarcastically interjected. Victor, do you really think that after everything you've said, I'm going to believe you? I knew it would be difficult. He stood up, heading toward me. But we don't have time. That phrase made me stop. No time? I turned to him. Why? He's sick, his voice shook. What? I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. He has a rare disease. He needs a bone marrow transplant. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was joking or not. Are you saying I should, what? Be a donor? I don't know. But we have a chance to save him. If you agree to be tested. Those words sounded like a judgment. Do you realize you're asking me to trust you? I stepped toward him, feeling my anger rising again. After everything you've done? I understand, he answered quietly. But this isn't about us now, Anna. It's about him. I sank down onto the couch, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. Why did you come just now? I looked at him, not hiding my resentment. Because I'd been looking for him for a long time, Victor answered. And when I found him, I found out that he was sick. I covered my face with my hands, not knowing what to say. Anna, he sat down next to me. I know I have no right to ask you. But I'm begging you. His voice sounded sincere, and in it was all the pain I didn't want to see. I lifted my head and looked at him. Okay, I said finally. I'll listen to you all the way through. But if I find out it's another lie, Victor, you're going to regret coming here. He nodded, and there was a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Victor sat down on the couch, as if the weight of years of lived mistakes had gotten even heavier. I stared at him and couldn't decide whether I was more annoyed by his calmness or his insolence. He looked like a man who'd been through hell, but I wasn't going to let him just go. If he wanted me to believe him, he'd have to spill everything. Every last crumb. Go ahead, I said, leaning on the arm of the chair. And don't you dare hide a single detail. He sighed, like it was the last deep draw of air before he jumped into the maelstrom. After we split up, I honestly didn't know where to go from here, he began. I lost you, I lost my job, I lost faith in myself. I grinned. Lost faith? Did you lose your conscience then? He ignored my barb and continued. I left because I was weak. You were always stronger than me, Anna. I knew I didn't deserve you. Don't flatter me. Just tell me what happened next. He looked away, as if recalling the events of 20 years ago. I met a woman. Her name was Marina. She was a nurse, working at the hospital. We started dating. I tensed up. Would this part of the story get any more disgusting? One day she told me she saw you in the hospital. You looked depressed, his voice shook. She said you might be expecting a baby. I felt the anger start to rise again. And you decided not to come to me? I was afraid. I was nothing then. I thought you'd do better without me. Can I do it? I laughed bitterly. Victor, you can't even imagine what I've been through. I remembered how everything fell apart after he left. The loss of the baby, the loneliness, the days when I didn't even have enough money for food. But I made it through. I survived. You have no idea what it's like to pick up the pieces of your life, I said. In the meantime, were you building your new life? I tried, Anna. But Marina wasn't the person she said she was. He looked away. And what did you do? I left. I was alone again. I rolled my eyes. Victor and loneliness sounds like his constant script. So how did you come upon our son? A few years ago, I met a man who worked in child services. We casually got to talking and he mentioned that he had witnessed a difficult case at the hospital years ago. A case? Yes. He was talking about a child who had been put up for adoption. I started asking questions. My heart sank. And you found out it was our child? Yes, he nodded. I spent months verifying the information. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a mistake. But then, it all started to fit. I closed my eyes, feeling the world around me turn upside down. Where was he all this time? He was adopted by a family. They lived far away from here. Did you find them? I did. So? You just barged in on them and claimed you were his father? He shook his head. I wanted to, but I realized it might mess things up. Instead, I contacted a lawyer. I couldn't believe my ears. A lawyer? Victor, are you crazy? I couldn't just show up at their door. I had to make sure I had the right to see him. And what? Did you get it? Yeah, after a few years. I froze. Did you see him? Yes, his voice trembled. My heart clenched. What was he like? He was smart. Kind. Strong, like you, Victor smiled, but it was a bitter smile. I felt tears come to my eyes. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was afraid. Afraid? I shook my head. And now? Now I can't wait any longer, Anna. He's sick. And I can't save him alone. Those words sounded like a sentence. What does he need? He needs a bone marrow transplant. His chances of finding a donor are minimal. But we have a chance. A chance? You could be his donor. I froze. You want me to? Yes, Victor nodded. It could save his life. I didn't know what to say. Victor looked at me hopefully, and a storm raged inside me. I can't decide this right now. I understand. He stopped talking, leaving me alone with my thoughts. After Victor was silent, the room fell into a silence so tense that it was like cutting the air with a knife. I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice. One step forward and I could see the truth behind the story, but if I took a step back, I could run away from everything I tried to forget. I need to think, I finally said, not looking at him. Victor stood up, staggering slightly, as if what I'd said had taken the last of his strength. I understand, he said quietly. You have a right to do this. The right? I grinned bitterly. You took away all my rights 20 years ago. He lowered his head, but didn't say anything. I don't know if I can trust you. And honestly, I don't know if I want to, I continued, feeling the bitterness in my heart with each phrase. I'm just asking you to think about it, he said, looking me straight in the eye. After Victor left, I was alone, surrounded by the chaos of my thoughts. How could he show up after all this time with such a shocking statement? How was it even possible that we had a son I had never met? I tried to bring myself back to the days when everything was falling apart. Memories came flooding back. Victor was different then. I fell in love with him for his charisma, his confidence and his ability to make people laugh even in the most difficult situations. But that confidence turned into weakness when life demanded more from him. I remember him walking away. His face was grim and his words were sharp. You'll do fine without me, he said then. Can I? I did, but at what cost? Now, sitting in the silence of my apartment, I realized that old wounds I thought were long healed had reopened. What am I going to do? I said quietly to myself. There was no answer. The next day I got up early. As I washed my face, I looked in the mirror. It was as if my reflection was asking me, can you risk it again? Are you willing to trust someone who once betrayed you again? I picked up my phone, but my fingers froze over the screen. Victor's number was written down, but I couldn't press call. I had to think about everything first. In the evening, I called my friend Lena. She was one of the few people who had supported me during the hardest times. Hi, I said when she answered. I need to talk. Sure, her voice was kind and soft. What's wrong? I told her everything. About Victor. About his story. About his son. Do you believe him? She asked me when I was done. I don't know, I answered honestly. Anna, this is too serious to make a decision based on emotion. Maybe we should check what he said. Check? Yeah. Ask for the files. Find out more. If he's telling the truth, you'll feel it. Those words stuck in my head. I spent another night thinking about it. The next day, I plucked up the courage to call Victor. Hello? His voice sounded stifled, as if he hadn't been expecting my call. Victor, I took a deep breath. If you want me to help you, I need to see the proof. An hour later, he was standing at my door with a folder of documents. I've gathered what I can, he said, holding it out. I took the folder and closed the door without saying a word. All night I read. Medical records, paperwork from child services, photos. Everything pointed to one thing: Victor was telling the truth. Misha. My son. In one of the photos, I saw his face. He looked so strong, so kind. My heart shook. It's true, I whispered. The next day I called Victor. I agree, I said. He was silent for a long time, and then exhaled. Thank you, Anna. I knew that this decision would change everything. Victor came to pick me up 2 days later. I tried to gather my thoughts, but I felt like I was jumping off a cliff. Are you ready? He asked, standing at the door. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. We drove in silence. The car was old, with shabby seats, and smelled of something mixed: gasoline, tobacco, and memories. Victor kept looking at the road, and I kept looking at him, studying the face I had once known so well. You didn't tell me everything, did you? I broke the silence. He froze for a split second, but quickly returned to his neutral expression. What do you mean? Victor, I know you. There's always something you're not telling me. I want to know everything. He sighed heavily, not taking his eyes off the road. When we get there, you'll understand. I want to understand now, I said sharply. You dragged me into this, and now you think you can leave me with bits and pieces of the truth? He fell silent, as if struggling with himself. We stopped outside a small clinic on the outskirts of town. Victor pointed to the building. That's where he is now. I froze, looking at the building. His voice echoed in my head, it's about him. About our son. I took a deep breath, trying to cope with my emotions. Anna, Victor put his hand on my shoulder. Are you sure you're ready? No, I answered honestly. But I have to do it. We went inside. A middle-aged woman with a tired but friendly face met us at the reception desk. Victor Sergeyevich? She asked, and he nodded. This is Anna, he added, introducing me. The woman looked at me with a slight smile. I'm glad you came. Her words sounded warm, but it made me feel even more pressured. We were led into a small room. The air smelled of antiseptic, and the white walls pressed with their indifference. When the door opened, I saw him. Misha was sitting on the bed, reading a book. His face was pale, but his eyes glowed with intelligence and calm. He looked at us and smiled. Is that her? He asked Victor. My heart sank. Yes, Victor answered. This is your mom. I froze, not knowing what to say. The words were stuck somewhere in my throat. Hello, he said, holding out his hand. I stepped forward, took his hand, and felt everything inside me turn upside down. Hi, I breathed out, trying not to let my voice waver. We talked. Misha was nothing like I'd imagined. He was smart, kind, calm. We discussed the books he loved, his interest in music, and his dreams. But then the conversation got heavy. Victor said I could help, I began. Misha nodded. Yes. I have a rare disease. I need a bone marrow donor. His voice was steady, without complaint or pleading. Are you ready to take the tests? He asked. I nodded. Sure. Later, Victor and I went out into the hallway. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions, but I didn't have time to start. Anna, there's something else you need to know, he said. What else? I froze, waiting for the next blow. Victor sighed, avoiding my gaze. Misha knows about us, but he doesn't know the whole truth. The whole truth? I questioned. He thinks you left him, Victor said quietly. The words hit me like thunder. What? I tried to explain, but he'd been believing that version for too long. You let him believe it? My voice shook. I didn't know how to say otherwise, he excused himself. I felt rage wash over me. I froze, not knowing what to say, the words were stuck somewhere in my throat. Hello, he said, holding out his hand. I stepped forward, took his hand, and felt everything inside me turn upside down. Hi, I breathed out, trying not to let my voice waver. We talked. Misha was nothing like I'd imagined. He was smart, kind, calm. We discussed the books he loved, his interest in music, and his dreams. But then the conversation got heavy. Victor said I could help, I began. Misha nodded. Yes. I have a rare disease that I need a bone marrow donor. Forever. He nodded, realizing he couldn't count on much more. I knew my decision was the right one. But there were still 1,000 questions inside. And one of them kept bugging me: would I be able to explain the whole truth to Misha? The next day I took the tests. Everything was happening like a blur. The nurses were explaining what to do, Victor was sitting in a corner somewhere, not interfering, and I could feel my thoughts racing from one to the other. He thinks I gave up on him, the phrase echoed in my head. In the evening, the results were in. It turned out that I was indeed a match as a donor. It's amazing how nature is able to select such coincidences, I thought, but there was no relief inside. Victor came up to me as soon as I left the doctor's office. "Will you come over?" he asked hopefully. "Yes," I answered briefly, trying not to look at him. "Thank you, Anna." His voice was quiet, but he sounded genuinely grateful. "Thank you," I said coldly. He remained silent, realizing I wasn't ready to talk. The next day I was called back to the clinic. Preparing for the procedure was routine, but each step felt like a small step into the unknown. Misha was sitting in the room when I walked in. He smiled at me as if we had known each other for a long time. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Me too," I replied, trying to make my voice sound confident. We spent about an hour together, talking. I turned around and headed for the exit. Victor caught up with me. I couldn't believe that this man was my son, whom I had never known. But guilt was growing inside of me. How could I have let this happen? Why didn't I know about him? What was I supposed to do with this truth now? "Misha," I said when we were alone. "I want to tell you something." He looked at me with interest. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. "About your childhood. And me." I started telling him everything I knew. About how I lost my baby. How Victor disappeared from my life. About how he later told me we had a son. Misha listened attentively, not interrupting. When I finished, there was silence in the room. "So it wasn't you who left me?" he finally asked. "No," I answered, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "I didn't even know you existed." "But why did he say that?" His voice was quiet, but there was anger in it. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "How could I have let this happen? Why didn't I know about him?" "Thank you for telling me." Those words made me feel a little lighter. After the procedure, Victor tried to talk to me again. "Did you tell him?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "What did he say?" "He deserves the truth, Victor. Not your stories." He fell silent, realizing I didn't want to discuss it any further. Misha had a successful transplant. The doctors were happy with the results, and he had a chance to recover. But it was just the beginning. I decided to stay by his side to make up for the lost years. As I was about to leave for home after another day at the clinic, Misha suddenly said, "You shouldn't blame yourself, Mom." I froze when I heard that word. "You called me Mom? You aren't you?" Tears sprang from my eyes, and I couldn't help myself. I hugged him, feeling something inside me finally become whole. Victor stood in the hallway, watching us from afar. When I walked up to him to say goodbye, he said, "Thank you for giving him what I couldn't give him." I looked at him, and for the first time in days, there was no anger in my voice. "It's his life now, Victor. Not yours and not mine. Let him live it the way he wants to live it." He nodded, and that was the end of our goodbye. I knew our story with Victor had come to an end, but with Misha it was just beginning. It had been a few weeks since the procedure. Misha was recovering slowly but surely. The doctors said that the chances of success were high, but there was always a little bit of doubt. This fear lived in me every day, like a background noise that could not be turned off. I spent almost all my time at the clinic. Victor came sometimes, too, but we kept our distance from each other. Our conversations became short, almost formal. Maybe because there was too much pain left between us, or maybe because we both knew there was no turning back. One evening, sitting next to Misha's bed, I noticed that he was looking at me with a slight smile. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "Just wondering how quickly things have changed," he replied. "What do you mean?" "A couple months ago, I thought I didn't have anyone. And now you're here." The words hit me in the heart. "I've always had you, Misha," I said quietly. "I just didn't know it for too long." He nodded thoughtfully, and then added, "Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. Like I'm about to wake up and none of this is happening." "It's not a dream," I assured him, taking his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." A few days later, Victor came to the clinic again. He looked exhausted, like he was carrying an invisible weight. I knew he was trying to make amends, but his efforts seemed belated. "How is he?" he asked, standing in the doorway. "Better," I answered, not taking my eyes off Misha, who was asleep. Victor came in, sat down in the chair across from me, and was silent for a long time. "You know, I didn't think I'd ever be able to say this," he finally began. "But you were right." "About what?" "About how I'd ruined everything we had." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent my whole life running away. From problems, from responsibility, from you. I thought if I got far enough away, I could start over. But now I realize you can't run away from the past." I didn't say anything back. Maybe because I didn't know what to say anymore, or maybe because I didn't want to waste any more of my energy on him. "You made the right choice when you came to me," I said finally. "But that doesn't make up for everything else." "I know," his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. We both realized that our paths had diverged. Victor had come to right a wrong, but that didn't mean I had to forgive him. When Misha was released from the clinic, he and I decided to make a fresh start. I offered him to stay with me until he fully recovered, and he agreed. It was like a step into the unknown, but we were both ready. Victor walked us to our car. As we were about to leave, he suddenly walked up to Misha and said, "I know I never had a chance to be your father, but I hope that one day you can forgive me." Misha looked at him carefully and then replied, "I don't hold a grudge against you. Just, give me time." Those words made Victor freeze. He nodded, but I could see that something inside him had broken. The drive home was quiet. Misha was staring out the window, and I was trying to gather my thoughts. We both realized that there were still a lot of challenges ahead, but now was our chance to fix what we could. A few days later, I received an email from Victor. He wrote that he had decided to leave town to start a new life. There were many apologies in the letter, many promises to change, but I knew that this was his way, not mine. I read the letter to the end, folded it up and put it away in a drawer. Now, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, I looked at Misha, who was reading a book. His presence became a new support, a new purpose for me. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my gaze. "About how strange life is," I answered. "Sometimes it seems that everything is lost, and then it gives you a second chance." Misha smiled. "You didn't lose me. It just took time to find me." Those words were a true forgiveness for me. The ending of this story wasn't perfect. I still couldn't completely let go of my resentment towards Victor, and Misha continued to fight for his health. But now we had a chance to move forward. And the unanswered questions were a reminder to me that life is never easy, but it's always worth fighting for.